She called me nothing while I was under the kitchen sink, and 10 hours later, her entire office stood up when I walked in. The night before it happened, I was lying on my back on the cold tile, one shoulder jammed against the cabinet wall, tightening a leaking supply line with a flashlight between my teeth. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and rain. Claire came home at 10:37, heels clicking across the foyer, perfume sharp enough to reach me before her voice did. She had been at another corporate dinner, one of those polished evenings where people say strategy when they mean status and connection when they mean leverage. I heard her set her keys down harder than usual. Then silence. I slid out from under the sink and saw her standing in the kitchen doorway in a navy dress, arms folded, staring at me like I was something that had been left on the floor. "You are really doing this now?" she asked. I wiped my hands on a towel. Pipe was dripping. It would have warped the cabinet by morning. She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Just exhaustion sharpened into contempt. "That is the problem, Nathan. This is all you are now. Drips, tools, old trucks, little fixes no one cares about." I stayed quiet, because I had learned that silence could keep a house from catching fire. But that night, silence only gave her room to keep going. She stepped closer, her eyes bright with the kind of anger people bring home from rooms where someone else has been feeding it. "Do you know what it is like standing beside men who actually matter, then coming home to this?" She gestured at the wrench in my hand, the open cabinet, the bucket under the drain. Evan was right. That name landed harder than it should have. Evan Cole, her favorite office comedian, the man who always found a way to turn my plain shirts and old Ford F-150 into a punchline. I looked at my wife and saw the sentence before she said it. She had been carrying it all evening, maybe longer. "You are nothing, Nathan," she said. "Nothing." The kitchen went still. The refrigerator hummed. Rain tapped the window over the sink. My phone lit up on the counter between us, screen glowing in the dim light. "Richard Hayes." Subject line, "Tomorrow's ownership presentation." Claire did not look down. She was too busy watching for my collapse. I picked up the phone, turned it face down, and reached for the wrench again. "The leak is fixed," I said. Her mouth tightened, disappointed that I had not given her the scene she wanted. Then she walked upstairs, leaving her heels by the island like punctuation at the end of a marriage I had not realized she was rewriting. I stayed in the kitchen for a long time after that, kneeling beside the cabinet, listening to water settle in the pipes. She thought I had become small because I stopped standing in spotlights. She had no idea I owned the building where her spotlight was hanging. After Claire went upstairs, I cleaned the kitchen like a man erasing evidence from a crime nobody else would recognize. I dried the cabinet floor, tightened the last fitting, emptied the bucket, and placed the wrench back in the drawer where I had kept it for 12 years. The house settled around me, quiet and polished, the kind of quiet Claire liked because it made our life look expensive. White cabinets, stone counters, stainless appliances. A vase on the island with flowers she replaced every Friday because fresh flowers photographed better. She had built a beautiful surface over a story she no longer wanted to remember. I stood at the sink and watched rain streak the dark window, my own reflection floating there in a flannel shirt with damp knees and tired eyes. 44 years old. A little gray in the beard now. Shoulders stiff from years spent hunched over laptops, contracts, crawl spaces, and problems nobody applauded when they disappeared. I did not look like the men in Claire's office. I knew that. I did not wear slim navy suits or post leadership quotes on LinkedIn at 6 in the morning. I did not know how to hold a wine glass like it was part of my resume. I drove a 12-year-old Ford F-150 because the engine still turned over, the bed still carried lumber, and I had never trusted a man who needed a new truck to feel new inside. Claire saw all that and called it failure. What she forgot was that I had chosen quiet after noise nearly hollowed me out. Hawthorne Systems did not begin in a glass office with a logo on the wall. It began in a freezing garage in Cincinnati with a folding table, a secondhand laptop, and a whiteboard I bought from a closing daycare center for $20. Back then, logistics software sounded boring to most people. To me, it sounded like a locked door. Every warehouse, every trucking company, every regional distributor was losing money in the gaps between where inventory was supposed to be and where it actually was. I wrote code to close those gaps. Not glamorous code. Ugly, stubborn, practical code. The kind that worked at 3 in the morning when a dispatcher in Toledo needed to know why a shipment of medical parts was sitting in Dayton instead of Cleveland. Claire was there in those days. She would bring coffee in an old travel mug and sit on a cardboard box while I mapped routes on the whiteboard. She wore sweatshirts then, no makeup, hair pulled back, eyes bright with belief. She read my first proposal out loud and told me where the sentences sounded too technical. She named the first dashboard because I was terrible at naming things. When the prototype finally worked, she jumped up and hugged me so hard the marker fell out of my hand. "One day," she said, laughing into my shoulder, "people will know what you built." I told her I only needed her to know. That was the truth then. Maybe that was my first mistake. When Hawthorne grew, it grew fast. Too fast for a man who still thought trust was a business plan. Clients turned into contracts. Contracts turned into investors. Investors turned into board meetings, compliance reviews, growth targets, and men in expensive shoes telling me what my company needed to become. I was good at building systems. I was not good at pretending I enjoyed rooms full of people using words like synergy without shame. Richard Hayes was different. He understood operations, people, pressure. He could stand in front of a board and make them feel safe, while I sat in the back counting every hidden risk. So when my father got sick and my own health started warning me with chest pains I kept calling stress, I stepped away from daily operations. Not out of defeat, out of survival. We restructured. Richard became Chief Executive Officer. I moved ownership under Whitaker Holdings, kept controlling preferred shares, board rights, and an emergency audit clause my attorney insisted on. Claire knew some of that once, or she knew enough to understand I had not vanished. But years passed, titles changed, and pride has a way of editing old facts until they flatter the person telling the story. I gave her room to build her own career inside Hawthorne because I did not want my name to become a ceiling over her head. I never corrected people when they assumed I was just her quiet husband. I let her shine without reminding anyone who wired the lights. Downstairs, my phone buzzed again. "Richard." This time I opened the email. "Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Executive floor. Ownership presentation and audit authorization. Martha will bring the binders." I read it twice, then looked toward the stairs where Claire had disappeared. She thought tomorrow would be another day in her world, another office floor where men like Evan laughed at the husband she had outgrown. She had no idea the elevator doors were about to open on the part of my life she had chosen to forget. The next morning came gray and wet, the kind of Cincinnati morning that makes glass buildings look colder than they are. Claire was already downstairs when I walked into the kitchen, dressed in a cream blouse, charcoal skirt, and heels sharp enough to announce her mood before her mouth did. She did not mention the night before. People who say cruel things sometimes treat morning like a legal reset, as if sleep wipes the record clean. She stood by the island, scrolling through her phone, coffee untouched beside the flowers she had bought for appearance instead of joy. I poured mine into a plain black travel mug and said nothing. Silence sat between us, not peaceful, just organized. She looked up once, eyes moving over my flannel shirt, dark jeans, and work boots. "You are going out like that?" she asked. "I have a meeting," I said. Her mouth curved, barely. "With who? The hardware store?" A year earlier, I might have let that pass. 5 years earlier, I might have laughed along to keep the morning easy. That day, I only picked up my keys. Something like that. She gave a small breath through her nose and went back to her phone. I could tell she wanted to say more. She wanted one more little cut before leaving, one more reminder that she lived in a higher world now. But pride is lazy in the morning. It saves its best performance for an audience. At 8:05, she left for Hawthorne Systems without looking back. I watched her taillights fade through the rain, then went upstairs to dress. Not in a suit. That would have been too easy, too theatrical, too much like asking her world for permission. I chose a dark blazer over a clean white shirt, jeans without grease on them, and the old leather shoes Claire once told me looked too plain for executive spaces. Plain things have carried me farther than beautiful ones ever did. Before I left, I walked into my office and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was an old photo from the garage days, edges curled, colors faded. Claire sat on a cardboard box, knees tucked up, holding a paper cup of coffee, smiling at me behind a laptop that could barely run the first build of Hawthorne's routing engine. On the whiteboard behind her were 3 words I had written in blue marker: "Make movement honest." That was the original mission. Not growth. Not optics. Not quarterly applause. Just honesty in a system full of delays, excuses, and missing pieces. Claire used to love that phrase. She said it sounded like me. I slipped the photo into the inside pocket of my blazer, not because I planned to show it to anyone, but because I needed to remember that the woman who called me nothing had once witnessed the beginning of everything. On the drive downtown, Richard called. His voice came through the truck's speakers calm and low. Martha landed 20 minutes ago. The binders are in conference room A. The board will join remotely at 10. Are you prepared for Claire being surprised? I looked at the wet highway ahead, wipers dragging rain to the edges of the windshield. Surprised is fine, I said. I am not here for revenge. Richard was quiet for a second. He had known me long enough to hear what I did not say. Evan's department is nervous, he said. They know an audit is coming, but not from where. Good, I said. Nervous people tell cleaner stories. Hawthorne's headquarters rose out of the downtown block like a promise that had learned to wear steel and glass. 12 floors, blue logo over the lobby, delivery trucks moving through the side entrance with the efficiency our software was supposed to protect. I parked in the visitor garage instead of the executive space Richard had offered. Old habit. I have never trusted doors that open too easily. In the elevator, I watched the numbers climb. 8, 9, 10. My reflection looked back from the brushed metal wall, older than the man who built the first prototype, steadier than the husband who had stayed silent in the kitchen. When the doors opened on the executive floor, I heard laughter first. Evan's voice. Loud, polished, careless. I am telling you, Claire, if your husband ever gets tired of fixing sinks, facilities could use him. A few people laughed. Then I stepped out of the elevator, and Claire turned toward me. For one clean second, she looked annoyed, then confused, then afraid of what confusion might mean. I held her eyes, not smiling, not angry, and walked forward with the photo in my pocket and ownership waiting behind glass. The office laughter did not stop all at once. It thinned. First one voice fell away, then another, until only Evan's smile remained, stranded on his face with nowhere useful to go. Claire stood beside the operations pod with a tablet in her hand. Cream blouse perfect, posture perfect, expression fighting to stay professional, while her eyes asked a question her pride would not allow her mouth to form. Why are you here? I could have answered from across the room. I could have made the moment loud. I could have turned her confusion into a public lesson, the way she had turned my silence into a private insult the night before. But power that needs noise is usually rented. Real ownership does not rush. I walked past the row of desks where analysts stared over monitors, past the glass wall with Hawthorne's blue logo, past framed awards that thanked leadership without naming the man who built the first system in a garage cold enough to numb his fingers. Evan stepped in front of me like a man trying to protect a doorway he did not own. Nathan, he said, stretching my name into something casual and false. Claire did not mention you were stopping by. I looked at him, then at the badge clipped to his belt, then back to his face. She did not know. That took the grin out of him for half a second. He recovered quickly because men like Evan mistake quickness for intelligence. Well, facilities is 2 floors down if you are looking for maintenance. A few people looked at their screens too fast. Claire's face tightened, not in defense of me, in fear of embarrassment. That old difference landed clean. I let the silence sit. It grew heavier than any comeback could have. Then the glass doors to conference room A opened, and Richard Hayes stepped out in a charcoal suit, silver hair, calm eyes, the kind of presence that made an office correct its posture without being asked. Behind him stood Martha Ellison, my corporate attorney, holding 3 black binders against her chest. Richard did not look at Evan first. He looked at me. Then he walked across the floor with his hand extended. Mr. Whitaker, he said, loud enough for the nearest rows to hear. Welcome back. The board is waiting. He shook my hand like he had done 100 times in private and once now in front of the people who needed to see it. The room changed temperature. Evan blinked. Claire's tablet lowered an inch. Someone behind her whispered, Mr. Whitaker? A younger analyst near the printer asked, not unkindly. Is he consulting on the audit? Richard turned toward the room, his expression professional enough to make every word feel heavier. No, he said. Nathan Whitaker owns the controlling interest through Whitaker Holdings. There are silences, and then there is the kind of silence that rewrites a person's history in real time. I watched it happen to Claire. Her mouth parted slightly. Her eyes moved from Richard to Martha to me, trying to connect the husband under the sink with the name under the company structure. Evan looked as if the floor had shifted, but the building had not warned him. Martha stepped forward and placed the first black binder on the reception counter. The sound was soft. Final. We will begin the ownership presentation in conference room A, she said. The emergency audit authorization will follow. The word audit moved through the office like cold air under a closed door. Evan's confidence finally found the limits of its leash. He looked at Claire, but she was not looking back. She was staring at me the way people stare at a photograph they once cropped too tightly and only now realize what they cut out. I reached into my blazer pocket and felt the old garage photo between my fingers. I did not take it out. Not yet. Some proof is for rooms. Some proof is for the heart. I walked toward the conference room, and as I passed Claire, she whispered my name. Not with contempt this time. With fear. With memory. With the first crack of understanding. I stopped just long enough to meet her eyes. You should come in, I said. This company's history concerns you too. Then I stepped through the glass doors, and the office followed the truth inside. Conference room A had glass walls, which meant the entire office could watch the moment without hearing every word. I think Richard planned it that way. Transparency has weight when people have spent too long hiding behind polished titles. The board members appeared on the wall screen in neat little squares, faces lit by webcams from Dallas, Chicago, Denver, and New York. Martha set the black binders in front of each chair with the precision of someone who believed paper could save a company from the people trying to charm it off a cliff. Claire entered last. She did not sit beside Evan. That was the first honest thing she had done all morning. She took the chair 2 seats down from me, hands folded around her tablet, eyes fixed on the Hawthorne logo etched into the center of the table. Evan hovered near the doorway until Richard looked at him. You will join us for the audit portion, Mr. Cole. Evan's jaw tightened, but he stepped inside. A man can joke his way through a hallway. It is harder in a room with minutes, records, and counsel present. Richard opened the meeting. With my formal title, the one Claire had not heard spoken aloud in years. Founder. Majority preferred shareholder through Whitaker Holdings. Controlling interest holder. Board rights. Emergency audit authority. Each phrase landed on the table like a tool being placed exactly where it belonged. Claire's fingers tightened with every sentence. I did not look at her. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I did not trust myself to see her face and forget why I was there. 12 years of marriage makes a man vulnerable to familiar pain. One look can pull him back into explanations he has already outgrown. Martha opened the first binder. For clarity, she said, Hawthorne Systems underwent restructuring 7 years ago. Operational leadership transferred to Mr. Hayes, while ownership control remained with Whitaker Holdings under the amended shareholder agreement. She turned a page. The emergency audit clause may be activated upon credible concern involving executive misconduct, departmental misuse of resources, vendor manipulation, or culture failure impacting company operations. Culture failure. That phrase floated in the room, clean and corporate, almost too polite for what it meant. It meant the jokes, the quiet retaliation against employees who questioned Evan, the vendor contracts routed through his friend's consulting firm, the travel reimbursements that did not match calendars, the private messages Martha's team had reviewed after 2 employees filed complaints and then mysteriously transferred departments. It meant a company I built to make movement honest had started learning how to lie in expensive language. Richard nodded to Martha, and she connected her laptop. The screen changed. Audit notice. Access logs. Procurement exceptions. Expense patterns. Names. Dates. Nothing sensational. Nothing theatrical. Just facts, lined up so neatly that denial would have needed a ladder to climb over them. Evan shifted in his chair. This seems premature, he said. His voice still had polish, but the shine was thin now. These are operational misunderstandings. Martha did not blink. That is what the audit will determine. Richard folded his hands. Effective immediately, external compliance will review the operations division. System access for selected personnel will be preserved and monitored. No records are to be deleted, altered, or removed. Evan looked at Claire then, finally. Maybe he expected loyalty. Maybe he expected the same woman who had laughed when he called me her maintenance husband. But Claire was not looking at him. She was looking at the screen, at the structure beneath her career, at the name Whitaker appearing again and again in documents she had once known enough to respect. I reached into my blazer and took out the old garage photo. The board could not see it. Evan could not read it. But Claire saw it the moment I placed it face up on the table between us. Her breath caught. There she was, younger, smiling on a cardboard box beside a broken laptop and a whiteboard that said "Make Movement Honest." For the first time all morning, her professional mask slipped completely. Not from fear of losing status. From memory. I spoke then, quietly, because the room had earned quiet. I did not come back to embarrass anyone, I said. I came back because the company I built forgot what respect looks like. My eyes moved to Evan, then to the glass wall where employees stood frozen beyond the conference room. Respect for work. Respect for people. Respect for the truth inside the paperwork. Claire looked down at the photo, and I saw the exact second she understood that the man she called nothing had not been standing outside her world. I had been holding up the floor beneath it. The meeting did not explode after I spoke. That would have been easier for everyone. Explosions give people permission to focus on the noise instead of the truth. What followed was worse for Evan and harder for Claire. Procedure. Martha handed out access preservation notices. Richard instructed information technology to suspend deletion permissions for the operations division. 2 compliance consultants joined by video, calm and unsmiling, asking for laptops, phones issued by the company, vendor files, reimbursement records, and calendar exports. No accusations shouted across the room. No dramatic finger-pointing. Just a company returning to its own spine one document at a time. Evan tried to laugh once when Martha asked him to surrender his company laptop for imaging. It came out thin and wrong. "This is a little extreme, is it not?" he said. Martha looked at him the way a locked door looks at a bad key. "Standard procedure under the audit clause." Richard added, "You will remain available for interviews." Available. Not trusted. Not cleared. Available. The word took the color out of Evan's face more effectively than anger ever could. Claire sat motionless 2 seats away from me, the old photo still between us on the table. Her eyes kept falling to it, then lifting to the binders, then drifting toward the glass wall where employees whispered beyond the room. I wondered what hurt her more, finding out I still owned the controlling interest, or realizing half her office had just watched her learn it. Pride has a strange appetite. It can swallow love for years, but it chokes on public correction. I did not enjoy that. I need that understood. There was no sweetness in seeing my wife diminished. A man can be right and still feel the bruise of being right too late. While Martha reviewed the first set of vendor exceptions, my mind slipped back to a night in the garage 13 years earlier. Claire had fallen asleep sitting upright on a cardboard box, a red pen still in her hand, my proposal draft marked up in the margins. I covered her with my coat and kept working until sunrise. When she woke, she kissed my cheek and said, "You are going to build something honest." That was the woman I had married. Not perfect, not polished, honest. Somewhere between promotions, dinners, applause, and Evan's lazy little jokes, she had traded that honesty for a version of herself that needed me to be smaller so she could feel taller. Richard's voice pulled me back. "Mr. Whitaker, do you authorize external review of the operations culture complaints as part of this audit?" Every face turned toward me, including Claire's. I felt the weight of the room settle on my shoulders, familiar and unwelcome. Ownership is not applause. It is responsibility with better lighting. I nodded. Yes. Full review. No. Retaliation against employees who cooperate. Written confirmation by end of day. Martha made a note. Richard nodded once. Evan looked down at the table. Claire closed her eyes. Maybe she was remembering the garage. Maybe she was remembering the kitchen. Maybe she was finally understanding that contempt does not erase a man's history. It only reveals the person willing to forget it. The meeting broke at 11:23. Evan was escorted, politely, to his desk by human resources and an information technology manager, not as punishment, but as process. The office watched through glass and pretended not to. People are bad at pretending when fear enters the room wearing a badge. Claire remained seated after everyone else stood. I gathered the photo, but her hand reached out and touched one corner before I could slide it away. "I remember that night," she said. Her voice was almost too soft for the room. I looked at the photo, at her younger smile, at the words on the whiteboard behind us. "Make movement honest." So do I said. She swallowed. Nathan, I did not know you still had all this. I slipped the photo back into my pocket. No, I said. You did not know because you stopped asking who I was before you decided what I became. Outside the glass, the company kept moving, quieter now, careful now. Claire looked at me like she wanted a private hallway, a second chance at the kitchen, some softer place to repair what she had broken in front of herself. But some conversations cannot begin until the performance ends. I stood, buttoned my blazer, and looked toward the office floor. I have one more thing to finish, I said. Then we can talk. I walked out of conference room A with Richard on my right and Martha half a step behind me, and the office floor changed the way a room changes after thunder, even when no window breaks. People straightened at their desks. Conversations dropped into whispers. The analysts who had laughed at Evan's joke 20 minutes earlier now looked at their monitors like the answers to their own choices might be hidden in spreadsheets. I did not blame them all. Offices have weather systems. One loud person can make cruelty feel like culture if nobody above him opens a window. Evan had done that. Claire had allowed it near me because laughing with him cost less than defending the man she had started to resent. That was the part no audit could fully measure. Numbers catch fraud. Records catch misconduct. But disrespect moves through rooms and glances, little jokes, seating arrangements, and the silence of people who know better. Richard paused near the center of the floor and addressed the staff without raising his voice. Everyone will receive written instructions from compliance by 2 o'clock. Cooperate fully. No speculation. No retaliation. Hawthorne will remain operational while the review proceeds. Clean. Professional. Boring enough to be serious. I respected that. Panic is expensive. Clarity is cheaper. Evan stood at his desk with the information technology manager beside him, removing personal items from his laptop bag under human resources supervision. He looked smaller without an audience. Not ruined. Not dramatic. Just exposed to process, which is sometimes the coldest spotlight there is. When our eyes met, he opened his mouth like he wanted one more clever line, then thought better of it. Good. A man begins to grow the moment his jokes stop protecting him. Claire stood near the glass wall, arms folded around her tablet, watching Evan avoid her eyes. That was another truth arriving late. Men like him borrow women's pride and spend it like company money. When the invoice comes, they step away from the table. I turned toward the operations team, the same group Claire supervised, the group that had heard Evan call me a maintenance husband and laughed because laughter is safer than courage when paychecks are involved. I am not here to punish people for being uncomfortable, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. But I am here to protect the people who still believe work should mean something. If you have concerns, send them through compliance. If you have been pressured, document it. If you have been quiet because you thought nobody would listen, start talking now. No applause. Thank God. Applause would have cheapened it. Instead, I saw small things. A woman near the printer blinked too fast and wrote something on a sticky note. A young operations analyst lowered his shoulders like he had been carrying a backpack full of stones. An older dispatcher on the video wall nodded once from a regional office. Those were the signals I trusted. Not noise. Release. Claire watched me speak, and I could feel her memory working against her pride. She had heard that tone before, years ago in the garage, when I explained the first system to a trucking owner who thought software was just another salesman's promise. I had told him, I cannot make every road honest, but I can make the records stop lying. He signed our first real contract 2 days later. Claire framed that check. For a while, she kept it in our bedroom closet like a relic from a church we both believed in. I wondered when she stopped believing. Maybe there was no single day. Maybe belief does not disappear. Maybe it gets replaced, one invitation at a time, by people who clap louder for the version of you that forgets where you came from. When the staff began dispersing, Claire approached me slowly. Not as my wife at first. As an employee approaching ownership. That hurt in a way I did not expect. Nathan, she said. Her voice was careful. Can we speak privately? Richard glanced at me, then stepped away with Martha, giving us just enough space without leaving me alone in the emotional wreckage. I appreciated that too. Good leaders know privacy and isolation are not the same thing. Claire looked toward Evan's desk, then back at me. I did not know he was doing all of this. I nodded. Maybe not. Relief flickered across her face too soon. I finished the sentence. But you knew what he was doing to me. The relief vanished. her tablet lowered to her side. Beyond her shoulder, the Hawthorne logo glowed blue against the wall, clean and proud and ignorant of how many private humiliations had led us here. Claire's eyes filled, but she held the tears back because the office was watching through reflections, and pride still had one hand on her throat. "I am sorry," she whispered. I wanted those words to land like healing. They did not. They landed like a receipt for something already spent. I looked at the woman who had once sat in my freezing garage and told me the world would know what I built. Then I looked at the office that finally did. "We will talk," I said. "But not here. Not while you are still worried about who can see you." Claire did not follow me immediately. I think she needed the office to stop looking at her first. I walked with Richard and Martha back into conference room A, signed the audit authorization documents, approved the preservation notices, and gave Richard authority to communicate the review to department heads by noon. It was all procedure, all ink and initials and clauses, but my mind kept returning to the kitchen sink, to Claire standing over me in heels, to the word she had used like a gavel. Nothing. Strange how a word can be so empty and still weigh so much. At 12:18, the board call ended. Martha closed the final binder and slid a copy toward me. "You handled that cleanly," she said. Cleanly. I almost laughed. Nothing about the inside of me felt clean. It felt like an old basement after a flood, the water gone, but the walls still marked. Richard waited until Martha stepped out before speaking. Claire asked to take the rest of the day. I nodded. That is probably wise. He studied me with the tired kindness of a man who had seen companies survive what marriages could not. "Do you want me to arrange a separate exit?" "No," I said. "I can walk out the same way I came in." He did not argue. Good men know when help becomes another kind of pressure. I left the conference room alone, holding the black binder under one arm. The office floor had settled into a different rhythm. Quieter. More careful. Employees moved like people walking through a room where a picture had fallen off the wall and revealed a hidden crack. Evan's desk was empty except for a monitor, a coffee mug, and a small square of dust where his laptop had been. Claire stood near the elevator, coat over one arm, tablet pressed against her chest. Without the office crowd around her, she looked less like a senior operations manager and more like my wife after a long night she could not organize into talking points. The elevator opened. We stepped in together. For 12 floors, neither of us spoke. The mirrored doors showed us side by side. Her polished and pale, me in a plain blazer with a binder full of authority she had forgotten existed. The silence was not peaceful. It was crowded with everything we had not said for years. In the lobby, rain streaked the tall glass windows, turning downtown Cincinnati into gray watercolor. Claire stopped beside the security desk. "I am sorry," she said again. This time there was no audience, no reflection from the office floor, no Evan nearby to approve or excuse her. Just the two of us in the rain. I looked at her hands. They were shaking slightly around the tablet. "For what?" I asked. Her face tightened because the question required inventory, not emotion. "For last night," she said. "For Evan. For laughing when I should have stopped him. For forgetting what Hawthorne was before it became a title on my badge." She swallowed. "For forgetting you." That one reached me. Not enough to repair anything. Enough to hurt honestly. I opened the binder and pulled out the old garage photo. The corners were soft from years in a drawer. I handed it to her. She stared at her younger self on the cardboard box, smiling beside a man she used to believe in. The whiteboard behind us said "Make movement honest." Her thumb touched the words like they were a bruise. "I love that version of us," she whispered. "So did I said. Outside, cars hissed over wet pavement. A delivery driver hurried past the revolving door with a stack of boxes. Ordinary work moving through an extraordinary day. Claire looked up. "Can we go home and talk?" Home. The word stood between us, familiar and unstable. Last night, she had used that house as a place to look down on me. Now she wanted it as shelter from the truth. I did not say that. Cruelty would have been easy, and easy things had already done enough damage. "We can talk," I said, "but not like nothing happened." She nodded, tears gathering but not falling. "I know." I stepped toward the doors, then paused. "And not because you found out who owns what." Her eyes closed. That was the sentence she needed and hated. When she opened them, the first tear slipped down, quiet and late. "I know," she said again. We walked out into the rain separately, not far apart, but not touching. For the first time in years, The distance between us was honest. We drove home in separate cars through a rain that made every traffic light look blurred and tired. I reached the house first, parked the Ford in the driveway, and sat there for a moment with the engine off, listening to the ticking sound it made as it cooled. 10 hours earlier, I had been under the kitchen sink in a flannel shirt, letting my wife's contempt fall over me like dust from an old ceiling. Now there was a black binder on the passenger seat, my signature on audit documents, and an entire office full of people who knew the name Whitaker meant more than Claire had allowed herself to remember. None of it felt like victory. That surprised me less than it should have. Winning is a loud word people use before they understand the cost. What I felt was quiet, heavy, clean around the edges. Claire pulled in behind me a few minutes later. She did not rush to the door. She stood in the rain beside her car, holding the old garage photo against her chest inside a plastic folder Martha had given her. I waited on the porch until she came up the steps. The same porch where she once celebrated my first $1 million contract by hanging paper lanterns and burning half the steaks because neither of us knew how to host rich people yet. The same porch where, years later, she started taking phone calls outside because my presence in the living room made her conversations feel less impressive. A house remembers more than people admit. Inside, she kicked off her heels by the island, then looked at the cabinet under the sink. The towel was still folded there. The wrench drawer was closed. The leak was fixed. Small things have a cruel sense of timing. She touched the counter with one hand. I said something unforgivable, she whispered. I set the binder on the kitchen table. You said something honest. Her face lifted, wounded by the difference. I did not soften it. Not yet. That is what hurt, Claire. Not the word. The fact that you meant it when you said it. She sat down slowly, still in the clothes from the office, still polished, but no longer protected by polish. I forgot, she said. I forgot what you built. I forgot what we were. I looked at the flowers on the island, perfect and unnecessary. No, you remembered when it benefited you. You forgot when my silence stopped looking useful. That landed harder than I expected it to. She covered her mouth, not to perform grief, but to hold something in that had finally reached the surface. I pulled out the chair across from her. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Rain slid down the kitchen window. Water moved through the pipe I had repaired. The house did what houses do. It held the people inside, even when they did not deserve how steady it was. Claire placed the garage photo between us. I was proud of you then, she said. I know, I answered. That is why I stayed so long. I kept waiting for that woman to come back. Her tears fell then, quiet and unpolished. Is she too late? She asked. The old me would have answered quickly, because pain in her voice used to feel like an emergency I was responsible for fixing. But I was done repairing things just because I knew how. I looked at the photo, at the younger version of us surrounded by cardboard boxes, code, coffee, and belief. Then I looked at the black binder, the audit authorization, the proof that paper had remembered what pride tried to erase. I do not know, I said. But if we talk, it starts with the truth. Not titles. Not apologies that arrive after consequences. Truth. She nodded. Outside, the rain began to slow. I stood and opened the cabinet under the sink. Dry. No drip. No damage. The repair had held. I almost laughed at that, because life can be merciless with symbolism. Claire watched me close the cabinet door, and I think she understood. Some leaks can be fixed with a wrench. Some require tearing out what rotted behind the wall. By noon, her office remembered who I was. By evening, my wife finally did too. But memory was not enough anymore. Respect would have to be rebuilt, board by board, word by word, with no audience and no applause. And for the first time in years, I was not afraid to leave the room if the foundation cracked again.